just want to make one comment about publicly owned. One of the analogies I like to make is that, there's lots of things in government that are available to the public. We have things like our park systems, our libraries, our roads. These are all public resources. And when it comes to democracy and our voting systems, why shouldn't that be public as well? I think it makes total sense.
Just let me get through a couple more questions here, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Chris, I wanted to ask you, if San Francisco County or the state of California moved forward with these more secure, less expensive, open source, publicly owned voting systems, what effect would that have toward if San Francisco was to pioneer this? And I think the audience should be clear that this effort has been started in the year 2000. Alan Deckert, Brian Fox mentioned the Deckert design. So in 2000, the Open Voting Consortium started working on the designs of these systems and the advocacy work. So it's been going on, and it's been going on in San Francisco County now for over a decade, moving toward 15 years. So if San Francisco did carry forward the will of the Board of Supervisors, where we had an 11-0 unanimous vote to move forward with these proper systems, and the Elections Commission, which Chris was the president, mandated that we move forward. If we do get this together and overcome these hurdles, what effect will that have on San Francisco and the rest of the country?
Well, for one, it would put San Francisco in a great leadership position. If San Francisco were to be the ones that actually to move the ball forward on this, that would be a tremendous credit to the city and county of San Francisco. There have already been two counties that sort of took a little bit of movements in this direction, but ultimately didn't go forward. There was Travis County in Texas, which was working on a public voting system that was maybe going to be open source, but eventually about a year ago that they decided to cancel that project and just go forward with the proprietary system. And then the other county was Los Angeles County, that has been working on a voting system since I think 2006. Maybe they had their inaugural event, and then they spent a bunch of money developing a prototype. But even to this day, it's sort of very wishy-washy as to whether that system will be open source. And then the latest is that the registrar of LA County said before the California legislature, or a panel discussion, that it would be running on an open source platform, which means that the underlying system would be open source, perhaps like Linux, but there's no guarantee that the actual code for the voting system would be open source. So that really leaves San Francisco as the only jurisdiction in the country that is solidly working on this endeavor. As Brent said, this is an idea that goes back 12, 15 years. And there's been a lot of lead up to this steadily growing support within City Hall. And we've had a number of reports. We had our latest report finished a couple weeks ago, and then it's in the hands of the mayor right now as to whether this project will actually get funded. But like I say, if we actually fund the project and get this started, it can really provide a sort of a seed where other jurisdictions in the country can look to San Francisco. They might be able to contribute funds to it, help us build it, and make changes so they can use it in their own jurisdiction. So it could really catalyze some positive things.
One thing I want to mention is New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire, has moved forward with a system that was created by one of our board members at CAVO, Dr. Juan Gilbert, and that system was created by some grad students, and it is operational and deployed in the state of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, what some consider to be the most crucial element of the system, the piece that tabulates, is still running on a proprietary, secret, corporate-owned, faith-based software. So they should be acknowledged for their work, and Dr. Gilbert's work. The voter interface and the disabilities components are running on open source, which proves up the concept in a state setting. But we have to recognize that although it seems simple, and from what the open source technologists say, this is not rocket science, although some of the people involved are technically rocket scientists. The fact is, the forces that are against this work, Microsoft, Oracle, some of the heavy-handed intellectual property giants, they don't want open source systems moving forward, as they don't want open source to be highlighted as the solution to the election system crisis in the United States, as they believe that to be injurious to their financial bottom line. Understanding this is free software that then, in their minds, even though there may be some people that think otherwise, in their minds currently, these big intellectual property companies shy away from open source moving forward in general, as they consider it to be a problem toward their shareholder interest. So I just want to make that clear, that when we propose legislation, oftentimes we will literally see lobbyists coming from intellectual property world advocating against the passage or for the removal of the open source language. So we're now seeing this conflict between Microsoft and, as Ambassador Jim Woolsey says, those who bob in their wake, those who they run in a pack with, those interests tend to dominate this conversation. So if you're asking yourself, well, why can't we just move this forward if everybody is in agreement that this is a less expensive, more secure way to go, that might help you understand that it's not all peaches and cream on the activist front. In fact, there are very heavy-handed forces at work that keep this work at bay. So we need to, as a country, stand up and declare, hey, we appreciate your shareholders' interest, but we need to secure the voting systems first and foremost, as this is obviously a national security interest. And it's my personal belief that if we can't get this figured out, it'll lead to civil unrest, because people will be less likely to accept the results as they come in. Another question for Brian, and I just mentioned a few of these, but what can we do right now? What are your suggestions for the people to do to move this issue forward? What we've seen groups like California Clean Money now coming on board to be helpful, dedicating some of their constituencies. What, aside from making movies and that, what should we all be doing at this point to expedite this mission?
I think the best thing we can do, I think the best thing that technologists can do while moving forward in this process is to squabble less and look for a solution, a combined solution, faster. So there are some proponents of open source election systems out there that believe the system should be built one way, and some believe it should be built another way, and I say there's enough space to build the systems as many ways as we want. There are some proponents who say there should be no software in election systems at all, and to those people I say, okay, but that's a little bit naive in today's society. That's like saying we shouldn't have cell phones anymore, or we shouldn't use computers in general. These things don't work that way in a country of 350 million people. So I think for the technologists, I'd like to say, can't we all just get along and let's go get it done? For the people of the United States who have to live with making sure their votes are getting counted as cast, please talk to your representatives, talk to your congressmen, talk to your senators, talk to your friends, and explain to them that the current election system we have does not guarantee that your vote is counted as cast, and we need to fix that. And that is the biggest issue we're facing today. We must fix this problem.
Yeah, so for those who live in San Francisco, I want to kind of give you an update on where things are at and what it's going to take for things to actually start and what you can do to help. So a couple weeks ago, a consulting firm that the city hired came out with a report, which is something that the mayor's office had requested be done. And that report is done, and now basically whether or not this project starts is dependent on whether the city actually funds the project. Now, the city's budget process started back in last month in February, and it's going to go on until around June. And so the thing that I wanted to say about California Clean Money is they've started becoming very active in the past month or two, and they're actually working on, at the state level, on a budget item that would provide $8 million in matching funds to a county in California to use towards an open source voting project. And for this budget item to go through the California's budget process, we need to have the San Francisco government to actually tell the legislature that they're interested in this budget item. So for that, we need to have a letter from the mayor of San Francisco and the chair of the San Francisco's budget committee. And this letter needs to be signed within the next week or so. So really what we should be doing is contacting the mayor's office and Supervisor Malia Cohen to ask them to sign this letter asking the legislature to provide these $8 million in matching funds. And that's going to make it a lot easier for the city to fund the project on its own. And then secondly, the other thing that we need to do is to have the city actually budget some money towards the project. And for this, there are two people to contact. One is the mayor's office, and a couple weeks ago, the commission voted to support requesting $4 million to start the project off. And so for this, we need to lobby the mayor's office, and also there's a committee called the Committee on Information Technology that's made up of about 15 directors throughout the city, and they advise the mayor on what technology projects to fund. So the other group to lobby would be this Committee on Information Technology, COIT, and then tell them that this is a project that the city should fund. So those are the things that I think people can do to help today.
Okay, Chris, now I'm gonna ask Chris for your help, and I'm going to pretend to be a panelist and crash your party, and then you can ask me the last two questions before we open it up for audience participation, and there's no profanity in the questions, so don't be shy here. I'll just point. Yeah, they're just in the answers. Will be profanity. Go ahead. You be Phil Donahue.
Okay, these last two?
Yeah.
Okay, Brent, as I made my way over to this event, I had a couple questions that occurred to me. And the first is, what is the official response of the DoD and DHS as to open source voting?
Thank you for asking that question, Chris. Well, in speaking with the Department of Defense, they, like NASA, are open source proponents. Interestingly, in the conversations, they appreciate our work, like a lot of government appreciates the open source movement, but it's hard for them to always come out and openly advocate. I think sort of like the Jim Woolsey's associates in the CIA and the folks in the FBI, they're rooting naturally for democracy and for proper, clean voting, but it's hard for them to do much because they're handcuffed by their own positions. With the let me finish with the DoD. They have some think tanks behind them, and one day I was looking in the newspaper and I mentioned the heavy-handedness of the Microsoft type lobbyists that happen in this space, and I read a statement from the DoD that said, well, even though we've been working in the open source arena, we're basically equivocating. We're not so sure that open source is actually the way to go. So I got on the phone and I raised hell with some of the think tank folks behind the Department of Defense, and I think I was keeping Brian in the loop at this point, and lo and behold, a couple days later, another press release came out saying the DoD stands firmly with the open source community. So that's at the highest level that we're seeing this argument and the pressure that's put on by corporate lobbyists on this issue. They absolutely will stop at nothing to make sure that their corporate intellectual property interests are protected. And obviously, this is the big enchilada, and for the Democratic and I'm sure the Republican Party, this is the funding source for all the candidates, Silicon Valley and their intellectual property sales. So, you know, when they come with an ask, it doesn't go, you know, lightly. So that's the story with the DoD. With the DHS, Brian and I were on a phone call with them, and you know, we're up the ladder about as high as you can go. And interestingly, they're not apparently clear on this as being the necessity that the computer technology folks deem it to be. So this raises concerns with the Department of Homeland Security. Why are they not more aggressive, making sure that when we're talking about these next generation systems, that they are going to be guaranteed as open source? So this deserves inspection and conversation, that we're pushing on these highest governmental levels to make sure that when we move toward our next generation systems, that they embrace these technology solutions. If we go ahead with a bill like Kamala Harris's that just talk about paper ballots and audits, yes, they'll maybe be better than what we have right now, but they're still going to be exploitable, and they're going to create a false Band-Aid that is unacceptable. This is mission critical, and we have severe time constraints occurring here, so that's a little input on the DoD and the DHS. Did you have another question, Chris?
Well, I was going to give Brian, did you want to ask Brent?
Yeah, I had a question I wanted to ask.
Great.
So, you know, Brent, we know how you feel about this. You've been pretty vocal and pretty clear, but what did Obama and Hillary and Bernie have to say about this?
Thank you for asking, Brian. I actually had the pleasure of briefing the Bernie camp on this, and if you Google Bernie and Microsoft, you'll see his camp came out with a statement which was basically, what the hell is Microsoft doing in our elections? So that was the Bernie statement. With Hillary, I was with Hillary and John Podesta toward the end of their campaign, and I was mentioning to them that there was great concern regarding the results of the 2016 election, that we had great concerns. This was a similar conversation that I had with President Obama, then Senator Obama, previous to the 2008 election. I was with him and his sister Maya, and we had conversation. And of course, when you bring up the issue of election system security, especially at that moment in 2007, they looked at me kind of funny, like, you know, is there something wrong with this guy? And then the landslide that occurred in the 2008 election, I think he felt like, well, the voting systems worked pretty well for him. President Obama did put us in touch with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy under Dr. John Holdren, and we were working and having conversations. I know Brian was on some of those calls with the White House, and they were taking notes. And unfortunately, the fellow there that we were working with, Ed Felton, never really pushed as hard as we think he should have, or we could have had these systems in place properly by 2016. But dealing with Hillary and John Podesta, when I mentioned to them again, we had concerns about that election, and it was our position that if something were to go unusually in the election, that they should not concede, because conceding, as we saw, even though this is a nonpartisan issue, naturally, if you're noting irregularities, that issue of a quick concession, I don't think is in the national interest. In other words, there should be, upon the point of finding irregularities, there should be forensic analysis occurring, and that was my recommendation. So that night, Hillary Clinton did concede, and as to this date, there still has not been a forensic analysis of any of these systems that I know of, which is interesting because a lot of the intelligence people from the DNI, the other agencies, they speak as if there has been inspection into these systems, and the fact is we know that there has not as of this date. And I think there was one more question.
Okay, so Brent, this is a kind of mysterious question, but what is the matrix?
I can't believe that you would bring that up in public, but since you did, the matrix is a interesting piece of study that was put together by some good folks that are helpful to the movement of transparency in elections, and some of them are here tonight. The matrix basically shows a link between the people that are gathering grant monies on this issue, that are receiving grant monies. Dating back to 2005, we've seen groups such as Accurate, which turned into verified voting, and other groups absorbing all the grant monies. There's been $20 million plus dedicated to figuring this issue out. These monies come at the direction of the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, through the National Science Foundation, and go into these groups that you would think would be tendering proper systems. But my personal observation is that their coziness with some of these intellectual property folks prohibits them from developing the proper solutions. So, that, again, this is just my opinion, is a scam that is prohibiting us providing solution and protecting the national security interest. So the matrix basically lists everybody that those groups that get the grant monies are involved with, and this is very pervasive within the arena. So groups that you would think would be righteous and fighting on the same page for transparency have a little glitch to them in that they're tasting the monies that are filtering through the government, and we're still waking up in the morning with insecure voting systems. So that's why it's left to people that are, some of whom are on this stage now, Brian and government people like Chris, working for the good but not having the benefit of these millions and millions of dollars of grant monies, and we're all fighting for the country to make sure we get this accomplished. And it should have been done yesterday, and it could have actually been accomplished much sooner, but we're seeing this result of people that are getting the grant monies not coming through properly. And finally, on that note, we're also seeing what we call the Rosie Ruiz effect. Rosie Ruiz was the marathon runner who took the subway and then crashed through the tape in New York and Boston. She got busted for that, and we're seeing some folks that purport to be open source pioneers that actually come out of intellectual property world. And so as the trailer noted in the opening piece, there's what we call black ops in this space. There's people that have another agenda, and we just have to be aware. Some people might consider it paranoia. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. We need to have our eyes wide open on this issue, because there's a lot of money and power at stake when you're talking about elections. And so we're looking for the public, the people here tonight, and Brian and the technologists to all rally together through San Francisco, New Hampshire, and the state of California, and make sure that we're moving toward these better systems as soon as possible. So with that, I'll open up the floor to questions from the public, please.
So I found interesting your comment about the number of precincts you have to, I'm aware of that myself. Mm-hmm. And the news readers, they're not really news people. said several times and run it when this issue was fairly hot, well, they would have to do so much. We have such a big country. They just don't understand the system. So this is a what if question. What if we put together a map or 2 maps highlighting the small number of precincts you'd have to change both for a Republican election to be lost by tampering? This is the kind of thing the folks out there that are struggling to get back and forth to work every day are going to need. They're not going to come to a meeting like this or even read a long definition of what we're talking about, but we can get them interested in it. And we have contacts, and I'm sure you guys have got them. I'm preaching to the choir, but Tim Reiderman, for example, investigative reporter out of San Francisco, has worked for so many of the news services. He has contacts, and he would be able to direct us to people who would be sympathetic, and that's the kind of thing he would do. So, are we doing things like that?
The most direct answer I have for you is a website called myvoteismine.org, myvoteismine.org. And if you go there, you'll see another short film made by a different filmmaker, Mark Manning, a documentary maker. But this film very clearly describes exactly how we think, exactly the anomalies we saw in the 2016 election and how we think those anomalies took place. So in fact, it contains a graphic which is exactly the graphic you were talking about, a map of these different things, and a bunch of explanations from people, not just myself, but other people who have testified to the Senate and so forth. So I hope that this short 7-minute video will actually kind of really address that.
Well, that's just a follow-up question for Kim. Is there a way to extract that so that just a map?
Say it again?
Is there a way you can extract just that map? Like I would put it on Facebook because I have tons of family members all over these conservative states.
Yep.
And they would stand up and take notice if I sent them a map showing how we could defeat their presidential candidate by tampering with the vote. So just put it on Facebook, all of the people that believe in this.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. That's a great suggestion, and I think I can take that video and grab a couple of graphics out of that and put them there. But if you go to that site, I think you can also just do that kind of snapshot.
I can do it, I'll do it.
Yeah, myvoteismine.org.
I wrote it down. Chris?
Yeah, I think one point you're making is that with an election, you're only as strong as your weakest link. You don't need to hack into every precinct or every county in an election or even every state. If there's just a few swing states or maybe a couple counties in a state, that could be sufficient to swing an election depending on how close it is.
A couple of oil-producing counties in eastern Pennsylvania.
Questions?
Yeah.